To the Western world, Muammar Gaddafi is remembered as a monster, a brutal dictator, a tyrant, a man the world was better off without. But if you step onto African soil, you will hear a very different story. To millions across the continent, he wasn't a villain, he was a martyr. Perhaps the greatest president Africa has ever known. They see a man who built a nation only to be silenced by foreign powers who never understood what it meant to be African. While today's leaders struggle to deliver basic promises, Gaddafi achieved the impossible. He did what no one else could. So, why is there such a divide? Why is one man a devil to some and a savior to others? Today, we are peeling back the layers. We are going deep into the life of Muammar Gaddafi to show you exactly why, despite the controversy, he remains the king of kings in the eyes of his people. Muammar Gaddafi didn't rise from a palace. He rose from the dust. The year was 1942. He was born in a simple tent in Sirte, surrounded by nothing but the endless Libyan desert. His parents were Bedouin nomads, herders, people who knew how to survive in the harshest conditions on earth with absolutely nothing. This upbringing burned itself into his DNA. It explains why, even at the height of his power, he hated the city. He would often vanish, retreating back to the silence of the dunes to meditate. The desert was his true home. But as a boy, that silence was broken. Gaddafi grew up watching his country being torn apart. Libya wasn't free. It was a playground for foreign empires. He saw the Italians and the British turn his homeland into a battlefield during World War II. He didn't just watch the war, he felt its brutality. It was this foreign conflict that cost him his father. As he grew older, the injustice only got deeper. He watched as massive Western oil companies arrived. They began pumping liquid gold out of the Libyan ground, shipping the wealth overseas, while his own people starved. A tiny elite lived like kings. Everyone else fought for scraps. Young Gaddafi took it all in. The poverty, the foreign tanks, the stolen oil. The seeds of revolution weren't planted in a political office. They were planted right there, in the mind of a poor nomad boy who had seen enough. As a teenager, Gaddafi wasn't listening to music. He was listening to the sound of revolution. He glued himself to the radio, absorbing the words of Africa's new giants. Patrice Lumumba in the Congo, Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana. But one voice captivated him more than any other: Gamal Abdel Nasser of Egypt. To young Gaddafi, Nasser was a god. Nasser preached Arab nationalism. He rejected the West. He hated the idea that foreign powers should own African resources. But Gaddafi didn't just listen to the speeches. He studied the playbook. He became obsessed with Nasser's book. It wasn't just a manifesto, it was an instruction manual on exactly how to execute a coup. Gaddafi tried to start early. In October 1961, he organized demonstrations. He distributed posters attacking the Libyan king. He rallied support for Nasser. The authorities noticed. They cracked down, banning him and his family from the city of Sabha. That was the moment everything changed. Gaddafi realized that shouting in the streets wouldn't work. To change the system, he needed power. So, in 1963, he made a calculated move. He joined the Royal Military Academy. He didn't sign up because he wanted to serve the king. He signed up because he needed access to tanks, weapons, and men. It was the ultimate Trojan horse strategy. While his superiors trained him to protect the monarchy, Gaddafi was secretly building a shadow cell of young officers. He wasn't training to be a soldier, he was training to be an assassin of the state. In 1969, at just 27 years old, Gaddafi executed the unthinkable. While the world looked away, he led a surgical, bloodless revolution that toppled King Idris and dissolved the monarchy overnight. There was no civil war, no massacre, just a precise strike that wiped the slate clean. The next morning, the people woke up to a stunning new reality. The foreign puppets were gone, and for the first time in history, Libya belonged to them. In a broadcast that electrified the continent, Gaddafi declared that the stench of the corrupt regime had finally been washed away. He told his people that the army had destroyed the idols of treason and ended the long dark night of colonial rule. With those words, the unknown soldier didn't just take a throne, he declared war on the old world order. This moment changed African history. For the first time, a young African leader took full control of his country's oil and kicked out Western corporations that had been draining Libya for years. But Gaddafi didn't stop there. He went to work, implementing economic and social reforms that would be beneficial to Libyans. Many initiatives were established to aid entrepreneurs and develop a Libyan bourgeoisie. One of the first things he did was to launch a green revolution to increase agricultural productivity so that Libya could rely less on imported food. All land that had either been expropriated from Italian settlers or which was not in use was repossessed and redistributed. Irrigation systems were established along the northern coastline and around various inland oases. Then he moved to oil. Gaddafi sought to improve Libya's oil sector in a way that it would benefit the people and not foreign oil companies. To do this, he proclaimed the current trade terms unfair, benefiting foreign corporations more than the Libyan state, and threatened to decrease production. In December, Jalloud successfully increased the price of Libyan oil. In 1970, other OPEC states followed suit, leading to a global increase in the price of crude oil. In 1971, Libya began to earn at least $1 billion in additional revenues. Think about that. But he didn't stop there. As an essential step towards nationalism and socialism, Gaddafi nationalized Libya's oil industry, and not surprisingly, it proved an economic success. While gross domestic product had been $3.8 billion in 1969, it had risen to $13.7 billion in 1974 and $24.5 billion in 1979. In turn, the Libyan standard of life greatly improved over the first decade of Gaddafi's administration, and by 1979, the average per capita income was at $8,170, up from $40 in 1951. This was above the average of many industrialized countries like Italy and the UK. Think about that. An African nation beating by far the per capita income of an industrialized nation like the UK. Ask yourself, is there any African country that has this record today? The answer is no. A man who was able to accomplish all this and made the lives of Libyans better is who the West called a brutal dictator. How does that even make any sense? Anyways, moving on, he kicked out foreign military bases. He told the West that Libya would control its own destiny, and he used Libya's wealth for Libyans, not Europe or America. This right here is why many Africans admire him. Gaddafi was one of the few leaders who stood up to the West without fear, and he proved that an African country could rise from poverty to wealth in just a few years. This rise to power laid the foundation for the incredible changes he would later bring to Libya, changes that many Africans still speak about today. You see, when Gaddafi took power in 1969, Libya was one of the poorest countries in Africa. Most people lived in slums or tents. There was almost no healthcare system, and education was a luxury only a few could afford. All of this was despite the fact that the country was blessed with oil. Instead of enriching the people, it enriched only King Idris and his cohorts, as well as the foreign companies that controlled the country's oil wealth. But within a few years, everything changed after Gaddafi came to power. Gaddafi used Libya's oil money for Libyans and not for Western corporations or foreign governments. And this single decision transformed the entire nation. Under Gaddafi, the achievements are endless and cannot be denied even by the West, which called him a dictator. Libya became the richest country in Africa. And we didn't say one of the richest. No, Libya became the richest country in Africa and could compete and even surpass some Western countries economically. The country's GDP soared every year. Public services improved at a speed Africa had never seen before, and the average Libyan suddenly had access to things that many African countries still struggle with today. To understand the scope of what Gaddafi did, you have to forget everything you know about how a government usually operates. He didn't just tweak the system, he broke it and rebuilt it from scratch. First, he attacked ignorance. Under the old regime, fewer than 20% of Libyans could read. Gaddafi made education free, not just for kids, but all the way through university. Within a generation, the literacy rate skyrocketed to nearly 90%. He did the same with the body. Healthcare became free. He built modern hospitals across the desert. And if the Libyan doctors couldn't fix you, the government paid for you to fly abroad to get the best treatment in the world. Then, he declared that house is not a business asset. He famously said, "The house belongs to its dweller." He made housing a human right. If you were Libyan, you deserved a roof over your head. The government built massive housing projects where rent was either zero or so low it was practically free. But here is where it gets truly hard to believe. Imagine getting married. In most countries, that means debt. In Gaddafi's Libya, it meant a payday. The government gave newlyweds a gift of $50,000. That is not a typo, $50,000, just to help them buy a home and start a family with dignity. Finally, he built an economic fortress. While the rest of Africa struggled with weak currencies, Gaddafi forged the Libyan dinar. It became the strongest currency on the continent. One dinar was worth more than $1. Life was affordable, electricity was free, water was subsidized, and in a country floating on oil, the pump was a paradise. Gasoline in Libya cost less than a bottle of water. While the rest of the continent suffocated under the weight of IMF loans, Gaddafi did the unthinkable. He slammed the door shut. He refused to borrow a single cent from the West, keeping Libya debt-free and acting as a sovereign fortress in a sea of dependency. While other African nations had simply traded their colonial masters for foreign bankers, Gaddafi proved that an African country could rise on its own terms, without begging for aid or bowing to European powers. This defiance made him a dangerous anomaly to the West, but a hero to his people. For millions of young Africans watching, Gaddafi wasn't a dictator. He was a living blueprint of what African leadership could look like: strong, independent, and unbothered by foreign opinion. He showed the world that the poverty in Africa wasn't an accident of geography, but a result of exploitation, and that the only way out was to cut the strings. But Gaddafi's ambition didn't stop at the Libyan border. He wanted to erase the borders entirely. He argued that as long as Africa remained divided into 54 small, weak nations, the West would continue to pick them off one by one, stealing resources and dictating politics. His solution was a plan that terrified the global elite: a United States of Africa. He envisioned a single superpower with one currency, one military, and one passport, capable of standing eye to eye with the West as a true equal. This vision wasn't just a dream, it was a roadmap to a new world power. Gaddafi envisioned a continent where borders evaporated, allowing 1.4 billion people to move and trade freely with a single African passport. He proposed a unified African army, a force powerful enough to ensure that no foreign soldier could ever invade or intimidate a sovereign nation again. He wasn't just trying to unite countries, he was trying to build a fortress that could stand alone against the superpowers of the world. But the deadliest weapon in his arsenal wasn't military, it was financial. Gaddafi proposed the gold-backed African dinar, a new currency designed to replace the US dollar and the French CFA franc in African trade. Since Africa holds the world's largest gold reserves, this currency would have been backed by real value, instantly making it stronger than the dollar or the euro. It was a plan designed to crash the colonial economic system and finally return the continent's wealth to its people. Gaddafi didn't just talk about this revolution, he financed it. As chairman of the African Union, he poured billions into roads, hospitals, and liberation movements, single-handedly funding the rise of this new giant. This terrified the West. They understood that a united Africa, armed with its own military, connected by its own passport, and powered by its own gold, would permanently end 5 centuries of Western dominance. And that was a reality they simply could not allow. But Gaddafi had a problem, and it wasn't just the enemies across the ocean, it was the enemies in the room. While the people cheered for a united Africa, many African leaders sat in silence. They were afraid. Some feared losing their own power to Gaddafi. Others were terrified of losing the financial aid checks that arrived every month from Europe and America. But Gaddafi didn't care about their fear. He kept pushing. From the mines of South Africa to the hills of Uganda, he built alliances. He preached unity more aggressively than any man in history. This is why, to this day, millions don't see him as just a Libyan colonel. They see him as the guardian of the continent. He dreamed of an Africa that was rich, powerful, and terrifyingly independent. And that dream is exactly what put a target on his back. For decades, he hammered home one specific nightmare for the global elite: a single nation, one army, one passport, and a currency made of gold. If this actually happened, the game was over. Africa would stop needing the dollar. They would stop needing the euro. They would stop needing Western banks. For the first time in history, Africa would control its own resources and, more importantly, set its own prices. To the power players in Paris and Washington, this wasn't just policy. It was an economic nuclear bomb. A united Africa wouldn't just be strong, it would shift the balance of the entire world. Countries that had built their wealth on cheap African resources realized a hard truth: if Africa stands up, they fall down. In 2009, Gaddafi became more than just a vocal critic. He became an existential threat to the global financial order. He didn't just propose the gold-backed African dinar, he demanded it, urging African nations to reject the US dollar and the French CFA in favor of a currency backed by real gold. This wasn't just policy, it was a declaration of economic war that threatened to dismantle the neo-colonial grip on African resources and render Western banking systems obsolete on the continent. The response was swift and brutal. When internal protests erupted in 2011, Western powers didn't hesitate. NATO launched a full-scale military intervention that dismantled his regime and ended his life within months. While the official narrative claimed the mission was to protect civilians, many across the continent believed the timing was no accident. Gaddafi was silenced because his dream of a financially independent United States of Africa was a reality the West simply could not afford to let happen. Today, the dust has settled, but Gaddafi's ghost still haunts the continent. He is remembered less for his flaws and more for the sheer audacity of his vision, a dream of a sovereign giant capable of standing eye to eye with the world's superpowers. His death left a void, but it also cemented a powerful idea in the minds of millions, that the poverty of the continent is not inevitable, and that true freedom requires the kind of boldness that most leaders are still too afraid to touch. He stood alone when few believed it was possible. He didn't just speak about African unity, he bankrolled it. He took the black gold from under the Libyan sand and turned it into survival for his neighbors. He funded power plants, paved roads, and built schools. When nations were on the brink of collapse, he paid their bills. He looked the world in the eye and demanded one thing: respect. He refused to let Africa be treated like a colony. He demanded it be treated like a titan. And today, they may have buried the man, but they couldn't bury the dream. Walk through the halls of the African Union today, and you will still hear his echoes. They are still debating the single passport. They are still whispering about a single currency. Leaders across the continent are finally saying out loud what Gaddafi screamed for decades: Africa must control its own wealth. Whether history remembers him as a hero, a villain, or a madman, one truth is undeniable. Muammar Gaddafi didn't just rule Libya, he reshaped the soul of a continent. He forced Africa to look in the mirror and see a superpower. He left behind a blueprint that the world tried to burn, but that Africa is still trying to build. But now, I want to turn this over to you. Was Gaddafi a tyrant who got what he deserved? Or was he the last true guardian of African independence? Let me know what you think in the comments below. If you enjoyed this deep dive, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe. We are just getting started.